Today, we're going to tackle a big one. It's a powerful and, let's be honest, often really misunderstood way of looking at the world. It's a core idea in a ton of political thought, and it goes by the name dialectical materialism. And to help us get our heads around it, I want you to meet a little conceptual tool we're calling Comrade Clanker. So just think of Clanker as a machine. It doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have opinions. Its only job is to process information and help us see how the world actually works, on a really fundamental level. We're going to use this tool to try and make sense of a feeling that I think is super common these days. You know that sense that everything is just chaotic, totally overwhelming, maybe even feels like it's on fire? Well, this isn't about some abstract theory. It's a method for trying to find the logic hidden inside all that chaos.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start by seeing it as a guide to our world. Then we'll get into the two key ingredients. After that, we'll see the method in action. And finally, we'll talk about why it's a tool, not a dogma.
All right, let's dive into part one, a guide to our world. The big idea here is pretty simple. If you want to get different answers, you've got to start by asking different questions. And this method, it gives us a whole new set of questions to work with.
So instead of getting lost in these really abstract ideas like freedom or human nature, this approach starts right here, on the ground, with the real world. It asks four super concrete questions to understand pretty much any situation. Who owns what? Who's actually doing the work? Who's raking in the profits? And crucially, who ends up paying the costs for all of it? Okay, so how does this whole thing actually work? Let's get into its two key ingredients. Now, I know the name dialectical materialism sounds super academic and complicated, right? But really, we can just break it down into its two parts, materialism and dialectics.
First up, let's talk about materialism. And we need to get something straight right off the bat. This has nothing to do with loving fancy cars or designer clothes. That's not what we're talking about. In this framework, materialism just means we start our analysis with the real physical world, how we produce things, how we survive, before we even start talking about the ideas people have in their heads. And here's the really crucial point. The way a society organizes itself to make and distribute stuff, what some people call the economic base, it's like the foundation of a building. It doesn't just sit there by itself. It powerfully shapes everything that gets built on top of it. Our laws, our politics, our culture. None of that stuff just pops up out of thin air. It's all deeply rooted in that material foundation. Okay, on to the second ingredient, dialectical. So what does that mean? Well, it's a way of seeing the world not as a collection of static, separate things, like a snapshot. Instead, think of it more like a movie. It's a web of interconnected processes that are always moving, always changing, and often clashing with each other. We can actually break that down into three pretty simple ideas. First, everything changes. Nothing is permanent, right? Empires fall, new industries pop up, and then die out. Second, change comes from contradictions. It doesn't just happen randomly. It's driven by these built-in conflicts. And third, everything is connected. You just can't understand one piece of the puzzle in isolation. You have to see how it connects to the whole thing. Let's look at a really classic example of a contradiction. Think about workers versus bosses. Workers, well, they want higher wages so they can live a decent life. But bosses, they often want to keep wages as low as possible to increase their profit. See? These two goals are fundamentally in conflict. It's not about good people or bad people. It's an opposing interest that's just baked right into the structure of the system. And this right here is the engine of the whole dialectical process. These tensions, these contradictions, they don't just magically disappear. You can't just wish them away. They build up pressure, they create struggle, and ultimately, they are the very forces that push history forward. So let's put these two ideas, materialism and dialectics, together and see what happens. We're going to look at the method in action by exploring a huge historical shift, the move from feudalism to capitalism. So let's put it all together in one sentence. What is dialectical materialism? It's a way of understanding the world that starts from real material conditions and sees those conditions as always changing because of conflict and struggle. Okay, theory's done. Let's see what this actually looks like in practice. So how did something like capitalism even begin? Well, the story you usually hear in a textbook is something like, people discovered new ideas about freedom and markets. But the dialectical materialist story is a bit different. It says no. It happened because different classes of people with totally different material interests fought it out, and a whole new society was forged in that struggle.
And you can see how that process played out right here. First, the old feudal system it couldn't support the growing population anymore. It hit its material limits. That created an opening for new forces to emerge, things like trade, big cities, new technologies, and all that created a whole new class of people, merchants, early capitalists. And this new class started to gain real power. And of course, their interests clashed directly with the old feudal lords. The old rules just didn't work for this new economic reality, and that led to conflict. And eventually, through revolutions and wars, a new system, capitalism, won out. Now, the ideas about freedom were definitely important, but they became so powerful because they served the real material interests of this new rising class.
Okay, so that's the history. But what about today? Let's get to our final section. How this is meant to be used as a tool, not some rigid dogma. Because this really isn't just about the past. It's about having a practical way to understand what's happening right now. One of the most important things this method does is shift our focus. It's so easy to explain problems by saying, oh, it's just human greed, or by blaming a few bad people. But this tool forces you to look deeper, to look at the actual mechanics of the system itself, the design that keeps producing these same outcomes over and over again.
So it doesn't matter what system you're looking at. Instead of just listening to the slogans, you start asking those tough materialist questions. Who's really in control here? Who is actually doing the labor? Where is all the profit going? And maybe most importantly, when a crisis hits, who gets bailed out and who gets left holding the bag?
Okay, but a really common question people have is, wait a minute, does this mean ideas and morals don't matter at all? Are they just meaningless? No, not at all. Ideas and morality absolutely matter a ton, but they don't just exist in a vacuum. They are shaped profoundly by our material lives. And then those ideas can inspire people to get together and change those very conditions. It's like a feedback loop. The key insight here is that just raising awareness on its own without changing the underlying material structure usually isn't enough to make a real difference.
All right, another big critique you hear all the time. Is this whole thing just some kind of religion that says communism is inevitable, that it's all predetermined?
No, it's really not. At its core, this is a tool for analysis and for action. It's not a prophecy. It's not a crystal ball that tells you the future. It's a way to understand the pressures and conflicts inside a system. But history is open. The future is not written. So, why does any of this matter to you and me? What's the big takeaway? I think it's this. This way of thinking gives us a tool to connect our own personal problems. The stress of paying rent, wages that never seem to go up, feeling totally burnt out, to the larger economic system. It helps us see these things not as our own individual failings, but as collective problems that come from the structure itself. And that means they need collective structural solutions.
And that really is the whole point. The feeling that everything is on fire, that anxiety, that chaos, that stuff is real and it matters. But this tool encourages us to go one level deeper, to stop looking at the symptoms and start looking at the cause, to ask, what is the underlying structure that's creating all these feelings in the first place? Because if we can understand that, well, maybe we'll have a better shot at actually changing it.